Tonight we are diving deep into a topic that's been in high demand for ages, the historical Jesus and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Imagine this: you're a Bedouin shepherd, scrambling across the sun-baked, rust-colored cliffs near the Dead Sea, the air thick with ancient dust. A mischievous goat, probably named something like Trouble, darts away, leading you to a dark, shadowed cave mouth, a place that feels like it's been holding its breath for centuries. You peer inside, and there, nestled in unassuming earthenware jars, are brittle, rolled-up parchments. Little do you know, these are treasures that will send shockwaves through biblical scholarship. You probably wouldn't have recognized their immense value. Let's be honest, you might have even thought they'd make good kindling for a desert campfire. Thankfully, that particular survival instinct didn't kick in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and current time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from as we explore these ancient mysteries. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're now stepping back to the decade between 1946 and 1956. It's in this period, in those Qumran caves near the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea in Palestine, that these roughly 15,000 scrolls and fragments of scrolls are meticulously, and sometimes haphazardly, unearthed. These aren't just any old documents. Collectively, they formed the library of a distinctive sectarian community that flourished during the Second Temple period of Judaism. The scrolls themselves, a mix of parchment and papyrus, date from about the 3rd century before the Common Era right up to the 1st century of the Common Era. Think of it as their community's entire literary collection, stashed away as Roman legions marched ever closer. Imagine your local library, but instead of overdue notices, you just get silence for 2,000 years. The incredible importance of these finds, especially in the early days, can't be overstated. Suddenly, our oldest manuscripts of books that are now part of the Hebrew Bible, books written individually long before anyone conceived of a single, canonized Bible, jumped back in time by more than 1,000 years. Before Qumran, the earliest substantial Hebrew manuscripts of these biblical texts, like the famed Aleppo Codex, dated mostly to the 9th and 10th centuries of the Common Era. Yes, there were much earlier manuscripts of the Bible in Greek, from the Christian tradition, some impressive codices surviving from the 4th century CE, and even earlier scraps of Greek papyri. But these Qumran texts catapulted our access to the Hebrew originals way back, predating even those Greek versions for many books. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain the oldest known manuscripts of books later included in the Hebrew Bible. One of the immediate scholarly benefits of this discovery was the ability to study the transmission of these texts over an extra millennium. There had always been a nagging concern, you see. When manuscripts are copied by hand, letter by letter, word by word, errors inevitably creep in. A scribe might be tired, his eyes might skip a line because a word repeats, he might correct an archaic word he no longer understands, or even introduce a helpful explanatory note, a gloss, that a later scribe incorporates into the main text. It's like ancient autocorrect, but with a much higher chance of accidentally inventing a new prophet. The Dead Sea Scrolls, however, by allowing us to compare texts with a 1,200-year gap in copying traditions, demonstrated something remarkable. There was surprisingly little drift in the transmission of the Hebrew Bible texts. The scribal techniques, both ancient and medieval, particularly within the Jewish tradition, were incredibly effective at preserving the integrity of these sacred writings. We weren't finding radically different versions requiring massive corrections. Instead, the readings generally aligned very well with the later Masoretic text, the traditional Hebrew Bible. Now, we've recently talked about how the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible attributed to Moses, came together from multiple authors, looking at theories like the documentary and supplementary hypotheses. You might naturally wonder if the Dead Sea Scrolls shine any new light on these formation theories. The short answer is, not really. As early as these scrolls are, they generally postdate the period when scholars believe the Pentateuch, the Torah as we more or less have it, was redacted into its final form, that brown area on our timeline, if you remember. We saw something similar with the Samaritan Pentateuch. Its text also diverges after this main redaction. To truly get answers from Qumran about those earlier source documents, like finding an independent manuscript of just the Elohist source, or one of the two Noah's Ark stories completely separate and not interwoven, that would have been a bombshell. But, alas, no such manuscript fragments have turned up among the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, on the question of the Torah's specific literary origins, the scrolls remain tantalizingly silent. Historians still argue whether any of the non-biblical texts might indirectly hint at earlier source theories, but direct evidence is absent. It's worth mentioning that there has been an even earlier discovery of biblical text fragments, 2 tiny silver scrolls, amulets really, found in a tomb in Jerusalem at a site called Ketef Hinnom. These little guys date all the way back to the First Temple period, before the Babylonian exile. That's incredibly ancient. If we found a more substantial text from that era, say, an uninterwoven Noah story, that would tell us something profound about discrete sources. Unfortunately, the Ketef Hinnom scrolls only briefly quote a passage from the Book of Numbers, a priestly blessing. While it alludes to other Torah sections, the specific quote is a self-contained prayer, which the priestly source itself could have been quoting from an even earlier, known prayer. So, while fascinating for its age and its use of Paleo-Hebrew script, the original writing system before the Aramaic-derived square script was adopted after the exile, it doesn't offer much insight into the Torah's complex authorship. It's a quirky tidbit that these tiny scrolls, worn as jewelry, contain the oldest known citation of biblical text. The Dead Sea Scrolls, by contrast, offer us whole libraries of information, even if they don't answer every question we have. So, you're now surrounded by this vast collection of ancient writings, these whispers from the desert. What exactly do these thousands of scrolls and fragments contain? Well, if you were to sort them out, a task that has kept scholars busy for decades, and probably fueled a small nation's coffee consumption, you'd find they roughly fall into 3 main categories. It's like they had their required reading, their popular fiction, and then their super-secret clubhouse manifestos. About 40% of the total haul consists of copies of texts that were later canonized, meaning officially included, in the Hebrew Bible. Another 30% are other Jewish religious texts from the Second Temple period. Think of them as scriptures or scripture-like books that were important to some groups back then but didn't quite make the final cut for the Hebrew Bible's canon. This batch includes some texts that Catholics and Orthodox Christians call deuterocanonical, like Tobit and Sirach, which Protestants often label as apocrypha, plus a whole bunch of other apocryphal and pseudepigraphal works that didn't get into anyone's mainstream Bible, with a few exceptions. And the final 30%. Those are previously unknown texts, unique documents that seem to be specific to the Qumran community itself, the folks who stashed this library. These are often called sectarian texts, and they give us the most direct insight into who these people were. When you sift through all those biblical and scripture-like texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, looking for the greatest hits of the Qumran library, one book stands out far above the rest, the Book of Psalms. Archaeologists and scholars have identified at least 39 different manuscript copies of Psalms, or parts of them. It was clearly a cherished collection. Following Psalms in popularity is Deuteronomy. Then comes the first book of Enoch, and hang on, Enoch isn't in the Hebrew Bible, or most Christian Bibles for that matter, but we'll come back to its rock star status at Qumran in a moment. After Enoch, you find Genesis, then Isaiah, and then another non-canonical favorite, the Book of Jubilees. The list continues with Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and the scroll containing the minor prophets. In the Jewish canon, books like Jonah and Micah are grouped together on one scroll, unlike in Christian Old Testaments where they get their own little books. Then you have Daniel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Job, Tobit, one of those deuterocanonical texts, Kings, Samuel, Judges, the Song of Songs, Ruth, Lamentations, Sirach, also deuterocanonical, Ecclesiastes, and finally Joshua. Those are all the books that have at least 2 manuscript copies discovered. Remarkably, The Qumran library contained copies of all the books that eventually made it into the Hebrew Bible, with one glaring, rather famous exception, the Book of Esther. Not a single scrap, not one identifiable fragment of Esther, has been found. And this isn't for lack of looking. Its absence is quite conspicuous, especially when you see the sheer volume of other texts. Why was Esther left out in the cold? We can only speculate, as it's an argument from silence. Scholars still debate whether the absence of Esther from the Qumran library was an active rejection or simply an accident of preservation, though the former seems more likely given the community's other preferences. One theory is that the Qumran community, known for its strictness, might have disapproved of the central storyline. Esther, a Jewish noblewoman, marries a Persian king, Ahasuerus, often identified with Xerxes. Intermarriage with foreigners was a contentious issue, and this might have been a deal-breaker for them. Additionally, the Book of Esther provides the narrative origin for the Jewish festival of Purim. There's some scholarly thought that Purim itself might have been an adaptation of a Persian festival into Judaism, and the Qumran community, with its own very particular religious calendar, more on that soon, might not have observed Purim or appreciated its backstory. Maybe they just weren't fans of stories where the main solution involves a beauty pageant and a rather convenient series of royal decrees. Too much reality TV for them, perhaps. The book is also notably secular in tone for a biblical text. It's a gripping story, a bit like a historical novel, but it famously doesn't mention God directly, which is highly unusual for a book in the Hebrew Bible. For any or all of these reasons, Esther just didn't make the cut for the Qumran community's library card. Now, in stark contrast to the missing Esther, let's look at the books of 1 Enoch and Jubilees. These texts, which were ultimately excluded from the Jewish canon and most Christian canons, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church being a notable exception, as it includes both in its biblical canon, were among the most popular and frequently copied works at Qumran. This is a quirky tidbit. The Book of Enoch, though not in most Bibles today, was so popular at Qumran that more copies of it were found than many books that did make it into the Hebrew Bible canon, like Jeremiah or Ezekiel. So, what's the appeal? The Book of 1 Enoch is a fascinating composite work that dramatically expands on the enigmatic early chapters of Genesis, particularly the period before Noah's flood, that mythic, antediluvian golden age, or perhaps not so golden age. It elaborates on the cryptic Genesis passage about the sons of God, interpreted in Enoch as fallen angels, or watchers, who descended to earth, lusted after human women, intermarried with them, and produced giant offspring called the Nephilim. These liaisons, and the forbidden knowledge the angels taught humanity, are presented as a primary cause of the wickedness that led God to cleanse the earth with the great flood. Enoch also features a visionary apocalypse, where the ancient patriarch Enoch, who, according to Genesis, walked with God, and he was not, for God took him, is whisked away to the heavens. He gets an extensive tour of the cosmos, learns about an elaborate hierarchy of angels and their names, the nature of fallen angels, the workings of the universe, and prophecies of future judgment. Enoch basically got the VIP tour of the cosmos, complete with angel meet and greets and a sneak peek at the divine org chart. It's packed with cosmological details, angelic lore, and apocalyptic predictions that clearly resonated deeply with the Qumran community. Then there's the Book of Jubilees, sometimes called Little Genesis. This text attempts to rewrite the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, by framing it within a unique calendrical and chronological system based on Jubilees. A Jubilee, according to this book, is a period of 49 years, 7 cycles of 7 years, reflecting the sabbatical year concept. The entire history from creation to the giving of the law at Sinai is meticulously dated according to these Jubilee periods. Jubilees is especially concerned with precise Sabbath observance and adherence to a specific calendar. It claims this calendar was revealed by God to Moses through an angel. The book rails against those who follow a lunar calendar for religious festivals, insisting on its own solar-based one. Both 1 Enoch and Jubilees champion a year that is exactly 364 days long, and this wasn't just a casual preference, it was a cornerstone of their religious worldview, setting them apart from the Jerusalem temple establishment. So, you've got these texts, Enoch and Jubilees, flying off the shelves, so to speak, in the Qumran library, both of them pushing this idea of a year that is precisely 364 days long. Now, why 364? Well, the beauty of 364, if you're really into weekly cycles, is that it divides perfectly by 7. 364 divided by 7 is 52. That means your year is exactly 52 weeks long. Their year was exactly 52 weeks. No awkward, what day is New Year's on this year, discussions. Very efficient, if a bit seasonally challenged after a few decades. For communities like the one at Qumran, and for the authors of Enoch and Jubilees, the Sabbath had become incredibly important. They wanted the entire year to harmonize with the 7-day rhythm. In their calendar system, the year was divided into 4 equal seasons of 91 days each. Each of those seasons had 2 30-day months followed by 1 31-day month. The months were trying to nod at the lunar cycle, but not very successfully. And here's the kicker, no leap years, no intercalary days slipped in to keep things aligned with the actual solar year or the seasons. You can imagine, if your calendar is only 364 days long and you never add an extra day, you're going to start drifting away from the seasons pretty quickly. Our modern Gregorian calendar, based on the Roman Julian calendar, is solar. It has 365 days, with a leap day added nearly every 4 years, specifically to keep our Januaries cold, in the northern hemisphere, anyway, and our Julys hot. It keeps pace with the sun and thus the seasons, but our months are a bit arbitrary in length, a kind of historical leftover, and they don't tell you when the new moon or full moon will be. The Muslim calendar, by contrast, is purely lunar. It tracks the moon's phases beautifully, so you know exactly what the moon will be doing, but because a lunar year is shorter, its months continuously cycle through all the seasons over time. Then there's the lunisolar calendar, which originated way back with the Sumerians in Mesopotamia and was popularized by the Babylonians. The Babylonians, being the overachievers they were, figured out a lunisolar calendar. It's like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach while also predicting eclipses. Impressive, but complicated. This system cleverly manages to track both lunar phases and the solar seasons by adding an entire intercalary month every few years. This alignment happens roughly every 19 years. This became the dominant calendar across the ancient Near East, adopted by almost everyone except the Egyptians, who had their own thing going on. Crucially, during the Babylonian captivity, Jewish exiles in Babylon adopted the Babylonian version of this lunisolar calendar, including the Babylonian names for the months, like Nisan and Tishrei, which are still used in the Jewish calendar today. This became the accepted calendar of the temple establishment in Jerusalem during the Second Temple period, used by the Sadducees and informing the dates of major religious festivals. This is a mainstream historical fact. The Qumran community, as evidenced by texts like the Book of Jubilees and their own sectarian writings, adhered to a 364-day solar calendar, which contrasted sharply with the lunisolar calendar used by the Jerusalem temple authorities. The Babylonian calendar, while tracking moons and seasons, had no fixed connection to the 7-day week. The first day of a month could be any day of the week, just like our January 1st can be a Tuesday one year and a Wednesday the next. For the Qumran community, with their profound emphasis on the Sabbath, this was a problem. Their 364-day calendar ensured that festivals always fell on the same day of the week, year after year. This calendrical dispute wasn't just a matter of preference, it was a deep theological rift, putting them directly at odds with the Jerusalem temple authorities, whom they likely saw as compromised and incorrect. Several texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, beyond just Enoch and Jubilees, make explicit reference to the community's own 364-day calendar, showing their commitment to this distinct system. Beyond scriptures, both canonical and non-canonical, there are about 350 documents unique to the Qumran community, that last 30% of the scrolls we talked about. These sectarian texts give us the clearest window into their soul. Let's peek at a few. First, there's the War Scroll, officially titled The War of the Sons of Light Against the Sons of Darkness. This is a full-blown apocalyptic text, predicting and meticulously describing a future cosmic war. The Sons of Light are essentially the righteous remnant of Israel, the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, including those exiled in the desert. That's them, the Qumran folks, seeing themselves as the good guys, naturally. They are destined to battle the sons of darkness. This opposing army includes all the traditional ancient enemies of Israel, Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, Philistines, but also, significantly, those who violate the covenant. This latter group almost certainly refers to the Jewish establishment in Jerusalem, the very people the Qumran community had separated from. So the sons of darkness included the usual suspects, Moabites, Ammonites, but also, conveniently, anyone who disagreed with the Qumran community. Your neighbor playing his music too loud. Probably a son of darkness. The War Scroll details a 40-year conflict, culminating in a divine intervention, the ultimate victory of the Sons of Light, the restoration of the 12 tribes of Israel, spiritually speaking, and their subsequent conquest of all the nations of vanity. This scroll is a quirky tidbit because it not only describes a future apocalyptic battle but also details military formations, weaponry, like darts of lightning, and spears of radiance, specific battle cries, and even the inscriptions that should be on their trumpets and banners, such as the Called of God, or Princes of God. It's like an ancient Dungeons and Dragons campaign guide for cosmic warfare, revealing the community's view of itself as a purified, holy army awaiting the final showdown. Then there's a fascinating commentary on the biblical prophet Habakkuk, one of the minor prophets. This type of commentary is called a pesher, where the ancient prophetic text is interpreted as speaking directly to the circumstances of the Qumran community in their own time. The Habakkuk pesher, for instance, refers to a significant leader known as the teacher of righteousness. Scholars still debate the precise historical identity of the teacher of righteousness mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls, though most agree he was a pivotal early figure in the Qumran community's formation, perhaps their founder or an early influential guide. The text describes his struggles against contemporary enemies, referred to by rather dramatic titles like the Wicked Priest and the Men of the Lie. These figures are generally understood to be Hasmonean high priests who held power in Jerusalem, rivals whom the Qumran community viewed as illegitimate and corrupt. Finally, there's a very fragmentary text called the Rule of the Blessing, or Blessing Scroll. Despite its poor state of preservation, with scholars painstakingly piecing together tiny fragments like a divine jigsaw puzzle, its contents are potent. It includes 3 blessings intended for use by the community at the Eschaton, the end of the world. One blessing is for the restored assembly of Israel. Another is for the righteous priests, the sons of Zadok, a priestly lineage we'll touch on later, who are chosen by God to act like angels and lead the people. The third is a blessing to be pronounced at a messianic meal, specifically for the Prince of the Congregation, the Davidic Messiah, the Savior figure who will come to deliver Israel. These texts, taken together, paint a vivid picture of a community with deeply dualistic, sons of light versus sons of darkness, apocalyptic, and messianic beliefs, patiently waiting in the desert for the world to catch up with their version of reality. You're now getting a clearer picture of this desert community, with their unique calendar, their belief in an imminent cosmic showdown, and their anticipation of a messianic age. But how did they live day to day? What were their core beliefs as a group? For this, we turn to one of the most important sectarian documents, often called the Community Rule or Serech HaYahad. This scroll is essentially their constitution and bylaws, a guide to their communal life. It outlines the ideals and beliefs of the community, the rituals for entering it, the rules you had to live by, including a rather detailed list of penances if you messed up, like ancient detention slips, and it describes the community's vision of itself as a true spiritual temple, a sanctuary of holiness in exile while the physical temple in Jerusalem was, in their view, defiled. It's a kind of precursor to later monastic rules, like the rule of Saint Benedict that would shape Christian monasticism centuries later. Reading the Community Rule, you find that entry into this group was a serious commitment. It states that, all those who freely devote themselves to God's truth shall bring all their knowledge, their powers, and their possessions into the community of God. You bring all your possessions, all your knowledge. Basically, it's like moving back in with your parents, but with more ancient prophecies and less arguing over the remote. They were to purify their knowledge in God's truth, order their powers according to His perfection, and manage their possessions according to His righteous counsel. There was no room for slacking. They shall not depart from any command of God concerning their times. They shall neither be early nor late for any of their appointed times. Punctuality was next to godliness, it seems. And, they shall neither stray to the right nor to the left of any of His true precepts. Those who embraced this rule entered into a covenant directly before God, committing to obey all His commandments. A crucial part of this was the pledge, that they may not abandon Him during the dominion of Belial because of fear or terror or affliction. So, you commit to not abandoning the community during the dominion of Belial. No pressure, just cosmic evil trying to get you to break your lease. Belial, by the way, originally meant something like worthlessness, so sons of Belial were just worthless fellows in earlier biblical texts. But by the time the community rule was written, the concept of a cosmic devil figure, largely absent in early First Temple Judaism, had permeated Second Temple thought, and Belial had become a synonym for Satan or the chief antagonist. The contemporary leaders in Jerusalem, in the eyes of Qumran, were operating under this dominion of Belial, and their ways had to be renounced. The Levites within the Qumran community would recite the iniquities of the children of Israel, all their guilty rebellions and sins during the dominion of Belial, and then those entering the covenant would confess, "We have strayed, we have disobeyed, we and our fathers before us have sinned and done wickedly in walking counter to the precepts of truth." The community saw itself as the sons of light, locked in an epic struggle against the children of darkness, those outside, particularly the establishment in Jerusalem. The master or instructor of the community was to teach all the sons of light about the nature of humanity, how everyone possesses a certain kind of spirit, and how to identify their works. They held a strongly dualistic view of the cosmos. All the children of righteousness are ruled by the Prince of Light and walk in the ways of light, but all the children of injustice are ruled by the angel of darkness and walk in the ways of darkness. These two spirits, they believed, were established by God in equal measure until the final age, with everlasting hatred between their divisions. Truth abhors injustice, injustice hates truth, and their struggle is fierce. This dualism provided an answer to the thorny problem of evil. Why do righteous people, like them, suffer while the wicked, their enemies, seem to prosper? The answer was that this earthly suffering was temporary, a final judgment was coming, an apocalypse where God would destroy injustice forever, and truth shall arise in the world forever. So, who were these people, these sons of light living by such strict rules? The community rule and other texts describe their leaders as priests who, like the Sadducees in Jerusalem, considered themselves sons of Zadok. Zadok was the high priest during King David's reign, the eponymous ancestor of the chief priestly line. The men of the community were to separate from the congregation of the men of injustice, and unite under the authority of the sons of Zadok, the priests who keep the covenant, their own priests, that is, not the ones in Jerusalem, and the multitude of the men of the community who hold fast to the covenant. It seems highly probable that the leaders at Qumran were a dissident faction of Zadokite priests who had a major falling out with their colleagues running the temple in Jerusalem, especially those collaborating with the Hasmonean kings. To understand their enemies, we need a quick flight through the Second Temple period's chronology. After the Babylonian exile, you have Persian rule, then Alexander the Great ushers in Hellenistic rule, first the Ptolemies from Egypt, then the Seleucids from Syria controlling Judea. Then comes the Maccabean revolt, leading to the Hasmonean period, a brief, crucial time of Jewish independence, before Rome eventually takes over. The Qumran community seems to have been founded precisely during this Hasmonean period. The Maccabean revolt initially erupted as a reaction against extreme Hellenization when the Seleucid king Antiochus IV Epiphanes tried to suppress Judaism and defiled the temple by setting up an altar to Zeus. Judas Maccabeus, the Hammer, and his brothers led a surprisingly successful revolt, rededicating the temple. His successors carved out increasing autonomy, and eventually, figures like John Hyrcanus I expanded Judean territory significantly. His son, Aristobulus I, took the Greek title Basileus, king, alongside high priest, and his brother Alexander Junius expanded the kingdom even further. But here's the twist: these Hasmonean rulers, who came from a rural priestly family that had championed resistance to Hellenism, increasingly adopted Hellenistic ways themselves, including Greek names and titles. So these Hasmonean guys, who started out all down with Greek stuff, end up calling themselves Basileus. It's like a punk rocker ending up as a bank manager, happens to the best of them. Historians still argue about the precise nature and extent of the Hasmonean rulers' Hellenization and how directly this contributed to the formation of separatist groups like the Qumran community. Many traditionalists were not happy. The Hasmoneans weren't descended from Zadok, so their claim to the high priesthood was contested. Nor were they from the line of David, so their assumption of kingship was also protested. The settlement at Qumran appears to have been established sometime during the reign of John Hyrcanus I, around 134 to 104 BCE, who is a strong candidate for being that wicked priest mentioned in their texts, the opponent of their teacher of righteousness. This brings us to the question: who exactly was this Qumran community known to the outside world? Most scholars identify them with a sect known from historical sources as the Essenes. The ancient Jewish historian Josephus described the Essenes as one of the three major Jewish sects of his time, known for their communal living, piety, and distinct beliefs, many of which align with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Greek name Essenoi, or Esseoi, has a disputed etymology, but one intriguing modern proposal, made even before the scrolls fully came to light, is that it derives from the Hebrew Osei HaTorah, meaning doers of the Torah, a phrase, as it turns out, that the community uses to describe itself in some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author and naturalist, writing in the 1st century CE, located a community of Essenes on the west side of the Dead Sea, remote from the shore, above the town of En-Gedi. This description matches the location of Qumran remarkably well. Pliny also offered this quirky tidbit. He described the Essenes as a people that live without women, without love, without money, having only palm trees for company, a rather dramatic, if not entirely accurate, depiction of their ascetic lifestyle near the Dead Sea. Josephus and Philo, another Jewish writer, suggest Essenes also lived in various towns and villages throughout Judea, not just in one isolated spot. This could mean there were different branches or varying degrees of adherence. Josephus paints them as highly disciplined, rejecting pleasures, prizing continence, often neglecting marriage, though he mentions a marrying order of Essenes too, and despising riches. He states, "It is a law among them that those who come to them must let what they have be common to the whole order, so there is as it were one patrimony among all the brethren." This sounds exactly like the stipulations for joining the community we read in their own rule. You're starting to see this Essene community, likely the people of Qumran, as a distinct group with their own unique take on Jewish life and law, often in opposition to the Jerusalem authorities. Josephus, our chatty historian friend, was further impressed by their deep piety. He tells us that, before sunrising they speak not a word about profane matters, but put up certain prayers which they have received from their forefathers. After these dawn prayers, they disperse to their various crafts, working diligently until about the 5th hour, around 11 a.m. Then, they'd reassemble, clothe themselves in white veils, and perform ritual bathing in cold water. These purification baths, or mikvot, are archaeologically attested at Qumran, with several stepped pools discovered. After purifying themselves, they would enter a special dining room, Josephus says, as if into a certain holy temple, a place no one from another sect was permitted to enter, and there they would have a sacred communal meal. They'd go into their dining room, as if into a certain holy temple. So, presumably, no one was allowed to pass the salt too loudly or spill anything on the divine tablecloth. This ascetic lifestyle, according to Josephus, included a simple diet, which he believed contributed to their longevity, with many living past 100 years. They were also remarkably stoic. During the Jewish-Roman War, when many were tortured, they couldn't be forced to blaspheme their lawgiver, Moses, or eat forbidden foods. Josephus even claims some Essenes undertook to foretell the future by reading the holy books and using several sorts of purifications, and that they were seldom wrong in their predictions. And critically, in contrast to the Sadducees who, based on a strict reading of the Torah, largely rejected the idea of an afterlife, Josephus states that the Essenes firmly believed in the immortality of the soul. The Qumran community, then, and the sect of the Essenes, represent a vital strand in the rich, complex tapestry of Second Temple Judaism, the very world Jesus was born into. Now, this is where things get particularly intriguing for our topic tonight. Is there a connection between these Essenes, with their desert communities and unique beliefs, and Jesus? The most compelling, though still debated, link comes through the figure of John the Baptist. John is a historical figure, attested not only in all four canonical Gospels where he plays a pivotal role at the start of Jesus' ministry, but also by Josephus. Biblical scholar Craig Evans, among others, has pointed out a number of striking parallels between John's ministry and the practices and texts of Qumran. For instance, both the Qumran community and John the Baptist prominently appealed to a specific verse from Isaiah 40:3, a voice of one calling, "In the wilderness prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God." The community rule from Qumran explicitly quotes this verse, stating that the community should separate from the habitation of unjust men and go into the wilderness to prepare there the way of him, explaining this way as the study of the law. Similarly, all four Gospels cite this same Isaiah passage in direct connection with John the Baptist's wilderness ministry. John the Baptist even quotes it about himself in the Gospel of John. Both John and the Qumran Essenes called for repentance and practiced baptism or ritual water immersion for purification. The community rule states that an unrepentant person shall not enter the water to partake of the pure meal of the men of holiness, for they shall not be cleansed unless they turn from their wickedness. John the Baptist, as you know, preached a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. Both were also ascetics with special diets. We've seen Josephus describe the Essenes' simple diet and strict adherence to their own purity laws for food. The Gospels portray John as an ascetic who came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, a lifestyle contrasted with Jesus' more social habits. He famously wore clothing of camel's hair with a leather belt and ate locusts and wild honey. Locusts and wild honey. Sounds like a survivalist's energy bar. Definitely not winning any Michelin stars with that menu. Furthermore, both were harsh critics of the temple establishment in Jerusalem. Qumran texts rail against the wicked priest and the men of the lie. In Matthew's Gospel, when John sees many Pharisees and Sadducees coming for his baptism, he denounces them as a brood of vipers. Whether John the Baptist was actually an Essene, perhaps raised in their community before striking out on his own, we can't definitively say. Scholars still debate the extent to which Jesus' teachings were directly influenced by Essene thought, or whether the similarities reflect a broader shared pool of apocalyptic and messianic ideas current in Second Temple Judaism. What we can say is that the overlaps are significant and suggest they were breathing the same spiritual air. This potential connection to John is all the more interesting because Jesus' baptism by John is one of the few events in Jesus' life for which there is broad historical consensus. This is a mainstream historical fact. Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist is considered by most historians to be a historically authentic event due to the criterion of embarrassment. It caused theological headaches for early Christians. If John's baptism was for the remission of sins, why would a sinless Jesus need it? And didn't it imply John was superior, or Jesus his disciple? The Gospels show increasing discomfort with this. Mark, the earliest, presents it straightforwardly, though with John already heralding one more powerful. Matthew has John protesting, "I need to be baptized by you," and Jesus insisting to fulfill all righteousness. It's like your friends trying to explain why you, the class president, were seen getting advice from the guy who lives in the woods and eats bugs. Oh, he was just, fulfilling all righteousness. Yeah, that's it. Luke downplays John's role in the baptism itself, and the Gospel of John omits the baptism event entirely, having John the Baptist primarily bear witness to Jesus. Behind this growing apologetic unease, it's likely the historical Jesus began his ministry in some association with John's movement. Beyond John, are there other echoes between Jesus's teachings and Essene ideas? Both Jesus and the Essenes were critical of the temple establishment. There's a curious story in Matthew about the half-shekel temple tax, which the Essenes apparently refused to pay. Jesus, when questioned, has Peter miraculously find the coin in a fish's mouth to pay it, but also suggests that the children are exempt, perhaps hinting at a shared critique. Both also seem to have favored spiritual sacrifice over literal animal sacrifices. Josephus says the Essenes didn't offer sacrifices at the temple because they had more pure lust rations of their own, offering their sacrifices themselves, perhaps spiritually. Jesus, famously quoting Hosea, declared, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice." Paul later urges Christians to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. There's even a fragmentary Qumran text with Beatitudes, "Blessed is he who," reminiscent of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, though the Qumran Beatitudes tend towards traditional wisdom, like Proverbs, while Jesus's have a more radical, eschatological edge. Perhaps most strikingly, a Qumran scroll known as the Messianic Apocalypse, 4Q 521, describes the Messiah performing acts such as healing the wounded, restoring sight to the blind, making the lame walk, raising the dead, and proclaiming good news to the poor. This is a quirky tidbit because this phrasing is strikingly similar to Jesus' own reported response in Matthew 11 when John the Baptist's disciples ask if he is the one who is to come. Jesus tells them to report what they hear and see: the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Both are clearly alluding to similar passages in Isaiah, suggesting a shared messianic expectation. Whether these connections are direct or indirect, the Dead Sea Scrolls undeniably paint a richer, more complex picture of the Jewish world into which Jesus was born and in which early Christianity took root. They reveal a Judaism far more diverse and dynamic than previously imagined from rabbinic sources or even the New Testament alone. The scrolls show us communities wrestling with the same scriptures, anticipating a Messiah, critiquing their leaders, and striving for holiness, albeit in different ways. The Essenes, with their desert vigilance and apocalyptic hopes, were a vital part of that vibrant, often contentious, spiritual landscape. Their own story ended, it seems, around the time of the First Jewish-Roman War in the late 60s CE, when Qumran itself was destroyed. But the texts they so carefully preserved in those caves, their hidden library, waited silently for nearly 2 millennia to speak again. And as the echoes of their ancient voices fade, as the dust settles once more over the desert cliffs of Qumran, we find ourselves at the end of this particular exploration. The scrolls, once lost and now found, continue to challenge and illuminate, offering us not always definitive answers about Jesus, but an undeniably richer, more nuanced understanding of the fervent spiritual world he inhabited. They remind us that history is rarely simple, and that the past, much like those carefully copied parchments, holds many layers waiting to be unfurled. The light from Qumran may not shine directly onto every aspect of Jesus' life, but it casts a profound glow on the paths he and his first followers walked, paths shared with many others seeking God in an age of turmoil and expectation. Let the quiet of this thought settle around you now. Feel the weight of those centuries, the devotion of those scribes, the hopes of a community awaiting a new dawn. Whatever questions still linger, whatever new paths of inquiry these stories have opened for you, let them rest for tonight. Allow your mind to drift, carried on the soft currents of time, back from those ancient deserts to the stillness of your own space. The search for understanding is a long journey, and tonight, you've taken a few more steps.